Welcome to Spitting Seeds. Today I talk with Lily Petit about their adoption story. We talk about the whole process, from filling out the first application, how much everything costs, different types of adoptions, the involvement of birth parents before and after adoption, and much more. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. To support Spitting Seeds, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel and share this episode with others. To contact myself or Lily, there will be social media links below in the description. Thank you for watching, and now to the conversation with Lily. Lily, welcome to Spitting Seeds.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on. But first and foremost, congratulations. Huge milestone, huge season in your guys' life. You're a mother to Naomi, to baby, cute, beautiful baby Naomi.
Yep.
After such a long and difficult journey, what does it feel when you get to be a mom, a mother to baby Naomi?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. It's so awesome to be here, and I've heard so much about Spitting Seeds, so I'm really excited to be here.
Heck yeah.
And I think now holding her, and it's just, it all makes sense. You know, it's so weird, but like all the pain, all the struggle, all the everything that we've gone through, it just makes sense. And now I just get to hold my little bundle of joy, and she's so tiny, but all at the same time has the cutest little rolls ever, and I can't believe I get to be her mom, which is so insane that I get to call myself a mom. You know, when you have a little furry child or whatever, a dog, you're like, oh, fur parent. And I'm like, no, like, I'm a mom, and somebody's responsible for me, or I'm responsible for somebody. That is a little crazy. That is so crazy, but God is so good, and I'm so excited to get to talk about this now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How did you guys come up with the name? I'm assuming there's a story, there's a reason why
100%.
Naomi.
Yeah, so we, before we found out that we couldn't have biological kids, I was praying with a friend, and she was like, hey, what do you want to pray about? And I was like, I just wanted my heart to be still and like really trust God in his timing. And we were praying, and I didn't ask God for a name, but literally it just like dropped in my heart, and Naomi. That was not on any of our lists. It just, I heard it in my spirit, and I was like, Britt, that was her name. I was like, I think God just gave me like her name. And so I looked it up, and it meant the Lord's blessing and delight. And I held on to that. I didn't tell Josh for like 3 years. And I told him, hey, God gave me a name, but I kind of just want to kind of keep it to myself. And maybe by the time we get our baby, or, we have our baby, we'll figure it out together. And then fast forward 3 years later, or 2 years later, he still hasn't figured it out. I was like, maybe God will tell him himself, confirm. And Josh is like, nope, it hasn't told me. So the night before we came to meet her, I looked at him and I was like, we need a name. Like, this is going to be crazy. What if birth mom asks us, what do we want to name her? And we have nothing. He said, just tell me that name that God gave you. And I was like, fine, I'll tell you. And that's when I told him Naomi. And he's just like, that's it. That's perfect. Yeah. Like
name.
it didn't, none of the other ones made sense. And Eleanor, her middle name came from a place, our friend, he's awesome man of God, a prophet. And he was like, the names that start with EL have a special covering over them, means no trespassing for the enemy. And so I was like, that is so cool. Like, I just want her to be fully covered. And so Eleanor means God is my light and my lamp, so he guides her. And so it was really cool. The story of Naomi and all of that, just the redemptive of, her life looked one way because of the circumstances, and God's like, no, you're going to follow me, and I'm going to create something amazing with your life. I just feel like that's so over our baby girl as well. What was meant to be and what was actually going to happen now are two different things because of God. So Naomi Eleanor Petit.
That's the full name.
Yeah.
If we could go back in time a little bit, how did you guys get to the point of considering adoption? What led you guys to consider and follow through with adoption?
It's so crazy because some people think that we're adopting or we adopted because we found out we couldn't have kids. But we actually backtracked to our second date, and he asked me crazy, how many kids do you want to have? And I was like, is that what people ask on a second date? I don't know. And I told him, this is a little insane, but I want 4 biological kids. And then later on in life, when we're a little bit older, I want to adopt 2. And he looked at me like, just did not say anything. He's like, me too. So in that moment, I was almost excited about him as a person being a dad more than like somebody that I, had a crush on. And so we decided we're going to adopt, but later on, when we're 30, once we've already had a little bit like of parenting experience, when we have biological kids, and maybe adopt a kid who's older. And when we found out that we couldn't have kids, it was like we had some time, but God's like, hey, you're not going to do this when you're 30, you're 35, you're going to do this now, and you're going to get that opportunity to make your dreams come true ahead of time. And so we started that process, but it was always on our heart. Josh was, his parents and like his family were missionaries in Mexico. They built orphanages. They were kind of foster parents for a whole orphanage in Arizona. And for me, I just felt like it was something to do with our story of how we came into God's family. Like we weren't, he adopted us. We didn't, we're not born with that right. It was through Christ, and now we're adopted into this beautiful family, and he makes us feel so whole and connected. And it was like, what an awesome representation of what God has done for us, for it to be in my life as well.
You mentioned that you guys found out that you guys are not able to have kids. I know you shared some of the story on Instagram and social media. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it seems like right now more and more people, I hear those stories more and more often where couples having a hard time getting pregnant or not able to get pregnant at all. What's that season like when you find out in your situation that there was no chance of you guys getting pregnant, I guess naturally, organically?
For sure.
Was that season like, process like? How you and your husband, how'd you guys process that?
Yeah, so we always talked about, year 3 we'll start trying. We'll spend enough time together, travel, whatever, and then we'll start trying having a baby. And I remember just being so naive that March 2nd or 3rd, we celebrated our anniversary, and I was like, oh my God, I might be pregnant for my birthday the next month, and I was so excited about it. And I remember it didn't happen, and then the next month it didn't happen. And so I started seeing doctors and stuff, and they started putting me on supplements and all these other things. And by the time December rolled around, my body was just exhausted. I was so done because I was taking so many things in preparation for a baby, but I didn't have one. I didn't have one growing inside of me, so it was just a little too much. And before that, we talked about Josh being tested, and his parents had like 6 kids. I always say like a gazillion kids because it feels like a lot, but so we never kind of assumed there was a problem. But on my side, there was 5 kids, and I did have some problems like endometriosis, and I know they say it's a little bit tougher to get pregnant with that. It's still possible, but it's tough. And so we always just assumed it was on my side. Come to find out, in December, we went to the doctor, and I was like, what are the chances of getting him in here, and can we test Josh? And she's like, well, give it a few more months, and maybe we'll do it then. And I was like, nope, we're just going to do it now. Why bother waiting? And so we got a test, and we left to Seattle. We did the test, left to Seattle, and a month later when we got back, the test results came. And I still remember sitting in our room, and I got the email, and literally it just showed 0. Like there was nothing else. It wasn't like, 10 and like it's poor or whatever. It's just 0. And so I was like, maybe there's a glitch. But I took that moment in for myself. I was alone, and I was like, God, is this a start of something that's going to be like, a long thing? And is it going to be now prevalent in our lives? Because before this, there was always a chance every month. And now it's this jarring 0 staring at you, and you're like, how do I move forward from this? But still, I came outside, and I told Josh, and I was like, hey, babe, it just says 0. I don't know what we do. So we went to a doctor, and she's like, hey, maybe it's a faulty test. Let's do it again. So we did, and it came back the same thing. We got referred to a specialist, and the first thing I remember, I couldn't go, but Josh went by himself, and I was with him over FaceTime. The guy just says, like, he did an exam and all these other things, looked at the lab results, and he's like, I can just refer you to a sperm clinic or a sperm donor at this point. There's nothing you can do. I was like, no. You know, it's like if there's a problem on the women's side, we have an IUI and IVF and all these other things. Like you can do so many different supplements. What do you mean like this is the final thing? And we went from one to the next, and we waited months to get in with like top specialists in the Southwest. And they're like, nope, there's no chance. But the craziest part about all of this is that the test that we took without insurance cost $60.
Mm-hmm.
And for infertility, 33% of problems are on the woman's side. Mm-hmm. 33% of problems are unknown for unknown factors, and 33% are on the male side. And what's crazy is that they wouldn't have even looked at Josh had I not, like for another probably 5-6 months, had I not like stood my ground on it. Mm-hmm. $60 is what it was, and I spent thousands on supplements. So I think in that moment, I was like, why don't people know more about this? You know, why don't they, like, hey, both of you just, it's so easy. And so I think that was what was frustrating the most is, hey, we talked about you getting tested ahead of time. We talked about all of these other things. I'm just so frustrated with myself that we didn't do this earlier. Mm-hmm. But then I feel like God reminded me, like, you couldn't have handled this earlier than now. So it was really tough. And it was tough seeing him even feel like this is his fault, even though the cause of it is when basically the best that they can give us is when he was conceived, when the sperm and the egg came together, there was something misfired in the DNA and just gave him no ability to produce sperm, like none. And so when there was other options of, hey, we can do a surgery, maybe find a sperm, and that is a maybe 50% chance we find one, and then a 17% chance that IVF will be ever successful, but there's a 100% chance that you will have to be on testosterone replacement therapy for the rest of your life if you cut into there. Mm-hmm. I was like, what? Like, this makes no sense. I researched everything, and there was zero cure for this because it is like genetic. You'd have to grow like a whole mechanism to be able to create that. So it was hard. I think the hardest part was seeing him beat himself up for thinking that this was something that he had, like, it was his fault, you know? Mm-hmm. And then my husband, being who he is, he's so faith-filled. He's like, God's got this. He'll heal me. No big deal. We're good. And I was like, what do you mean? That you have to acknowledge the diagnosis. And so that's where we started kind of going two separate ways. And it was in the sense of like processing this journey of, I started grieving and, you know, crying, and a lot of well-meaning people are just have joy and da-da-da. I'm like, I always dreamed about, you know, I wasn't always like, oh, I'm going to be a mother, but I always dreamed about carrying life. Yeah. And so I had to grieve that part. And I remember I was slightly frustrated with him. I'm like, why are you not sad about this? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I know God's got this. Like, and if he wants to, he can. And I was like, I know, but like, this is reality right now. Yeah. And what God told me after a few weeks of being frustrated with Josh, of kind of not being on the same page with me, is like, you're looking for your satisfaction in him and not in me. Like, I needed to be satisfied with us going through this thing together, versus God's like, no. If you're having a hard time, you need to come to me. He's having his own thing with me. Don't worry about it. But this hole that I was feeling of, I need to go through this with my husband, I was trying to have him fill that void, which was only God, you know, could fill that void. Mm-hmm. So after 6 months or 7 months, we finally came to a place where we're like, this is our life. And if God's going to heal us, he will. I know he can. We still believe he will. But we need to keep moving forward, and he placed other, you know, things forward that we plan for later. So it's a little bit of a summed up version, but it was a lot of pain, you know, I know so many people going through infertility and a whole different slew of things, miscarriages, and, you know, and I can never understand that pain. I'm sure the pain of never being able to have a biological child is different than having one and losing it. So I don't claim to understand their pain, but there are a lot of times where you're just, you know, crying and on your bathroom floor and wondering if anything is ever going to change, or why me? These are the things. The biggest thing is, like, when we were trying, I'm like, oh yeah, but there's other people who can't even have kids. Mm-hmm. And then you find out that it's you. You always think that you're an exception, that you'll never be, it doesn't all happen to you, but you find out you're not that special, and
these
it happens to you.
Very difficult 6-8 months of trying to process it, trying to understand that. what are some things that you remember that helped you recover or gave you strength to move forward? What are some things that come to mind?
I think one, that the fact that the promise of Naomi came in December, a month before we found out we couldn't have biological kids.
Mm-hmm.
So God gave a name and he gave a promise. And so even though the world, in reality, it looked like it's not happening, it's not going to happen, we won't be parents. I was like, wait, but God promised, and he never goes back on his promise. So I don't know how you're going to make it happen, but you're going to make it happen. 6 weeks or 4 weeks later, after that name, he gave me another name, and it wasn't for her. So now I have another one that I'm holding on to, and I don't know whether that's through an adoption or that's through a miracle, healing. Mm-hmm. But that's what I looked at my track record with God. I was like, you were faithful here. You were faithful here. And every single time I came out from something hard, he made things happen in such a way that I could have never made it happen myself. And so I knew it was God. Mm-hmm. So the harder it was, like the more no you got, the more reality was like, like this is doomed. This is where your life is at. I'm like, what is God up to? Mm-hmm. Like that. I'm more curious. Yeah. I mean, more than anything, because I've seen him work through all of it. And the other thing is, there's a verse in Psalms that says he's closest to the brokenhearted. And so very early on in life, whenever things would happen, instead of just, reeling in my brokenness, I knew it was an opportunity to get closer with God, because at those moments, he's closest to you. You can just, feel his presence more often. Mm-hmm. You can feel him there with you. And so I think those two things of just knowing who he is, knowing his character, being honest about it, like, it freaking sucks. We went to prayer and somebody was like, I just feel the Lord is putting a cloak of joy on you. I was like, no.
Not right now.
No. I was like, no. This is a cloak of mourning for now. We're going to get through this period. But it's those two things. It's like, hey, you've done this before. This is the hardest one yet, but I've seen you work, and I've seen, like, whatever it's going to happen, you're going to get the glory. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's always, like, what kept Josh and I going, of he's close. He's near to us. What an opportunity to, just be near to him. And I know he's done it before. So
after hearing the difficult, devastating news, at what point do you start talking about adoption and have that being more of a reality a lot more sooner than in 10 years once you're settled in your life?
Yep. So around 2-3 years of being married, there's this couple, I'm sure everybody who listens knows, but Jen and, Bill Johnson, from Bethel, and they had adopted their 2 little boys, and they went through this agency. And at that time, it's a consulting agency, so it's not like an adoption agency. It's one that helps you work through this whole thing. I just felt the Holy Spirit say, whenever you're ready, this is what you're going to go with. And so we found out in January we couldn't have kids. In July or in August, we were actually here in Seattle, and we decided, let's give this consulting agency a call. Mm-hmm. And it was really, really cool because we were so afraid. And the first call that we have with is our consultant, Fallon, and it's a Christian adoption agency. And she just walks us through the whole thing. Hey guys, that's so awesome that you're taking a step. And one of the biggest things, and I think what made our hearts just calm down, is she said, we're going to take this as slow as you want to go, and one step at a time. I'm not doing 20 things at a time. You have to complete this before you can move on to the next thing. And so that's what really helped us, like, okay, let's start this process first. And then when you're done with that, you can stop. And until you're ready, you don't have to move on. And I think that really, really helped us. But it was around August, I'd say, is when we started, like, pursuing it. We had a conversation in June about it.
That's August of 2021.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so in June, we had a conversation about it and just talked. And Josh was like, wait, and so how fast can this happen? I was like, well, if we're home study approved, they can call us up any day. He's like, any day? This is crazy. And I was like, hey, let's just, then calling Fallon, she's like, one step at a time. I think it eased him and I to be like, okay, if once we're ready for the next one, we'll, go on to the next thing. So yeah, August is when we started the process.
The process, I think I'm curious. A lot of people are curious. Adoption comes up. as something that people are maybe interested in but don't know the process. If we could spend a little bit of time. So you call her up, first step, and the next couple big steps that you do either are part of the process that you go through to become approved.
So oversimplified version, you get approved by your state, you register with an agency, you get cases. And so, but
first state,
you have to be approved with the state that you reside in. It doesn't mean that you can't adopt from any other state, but you have to be approved with your state. And what you go through is called a home study. That's where the caseworker comes to your house, interviews any people living with you, which at that time we had my best friend Sana living with us, and she had to go through the whole thing with us, background checks, criminal checks. They interview you in Arizona. You have to spend at least 2 meetings and 4 hours together with the caseworker.
Two meeting 4 hours. Okay.
And so they came over to our house, looked around. You have to, have a fireplace cover. If you have a pool, you have to have a fence. If you have guns, you have to make sure that they're locked away. And so you go through this whole thing. You don't have to have it done in the first meeting, but they'll tell you, hey, these are the things that you need to have for our next meeting so I can sign off on it. And then they'll interview you. Why do you want to adopt? Is there, any part of your family that you don't feel comfortable, with or anything like that? So it's not only about you. It's about the aunts and uncles that the child will also have. And do you go to? We answered all of them no, and it was hilarious. No, we don't have trouble with this. No, we don't have guns. No, we don't have a pool. No, we don't have whatever. And then he says, okay, has any of you seen a therapist in the last year? All three are like, yes. And he's like, okay, one at a time. We're going to start saying, why. And it was just so hilarious to get to walk through this with, together with Josh, but also Sana was there. And so, you could just walk through all of that. And he gives you a list of paperwork. It's, your taxes, your financial statements, your physicals from your doctor, so many different things. You have to write or sign affidavits that say you won't ever hit your child. You won't ever, do X, Y, and Z. And so lots and lots of paperwork. And then one of the longest things I would say for the home study is they'll ask you each questions, and you have to write about all of it in great detail. About your childhood, about your relationship with your mom, about your relationship with your dad. How do you feel you relate to them? Did you feel comfortable in high school? It's detailed. And I would say that is one of the longest things that we had to do, because it goes so in depth, and sometimes you just don't remember things, but you have to write about them, because at the end of the day, once everything is done, all paperwork submitted, that caseworker that met you now gets to write this big home study and it's a report on you, and then they present it to the state and say, hey, we either recommend that you approve this couple or recommend that you disapprove based on all of the stuff that we have here. Once they submit all of that, it takes the court or about 6 to 8 weeks. Unfortunately, ours got submitted in December, and it was COVID and holidays, and we did not get approved until March, which was really, really rough, because after it goes through the court, it goes through the filing and motions and all these other things. And finally in March, we received you're approved. And so we're like, oh, wow, okay. Usually the process takes 6 to 8 weeks to get home study approved. It may be even less than that, depending on their availability and just the state's availability. But that would be like number one. You just want to get started with the home study with a local agency.
So with the home study, a little bit more on that. So they make sure that your home is safe, and they interview the future parents, the people that live in the house, any references, relatives that also talk to. What does that look like, or who do they want to talk to?
So we had to have 3 either couples or individuals who were non-family, and 3 who were family. And so you send them over like a little template and say, hey, can you fill this out about us, and send it over to the agency. It's, hey, do you feel that Josh and Lily have any reason to not be, parents? Another one, really, really huge in the adoption community. Do you feel that they would be able to handle a multiracial adoption, which comes with all of its own, stuff? And so they write about those things. Where have you seen Josh and Lily showcase, parenting abilities? And so they'll write about that, and they'll send it in. And I think that's one of the, for you can, go as fast as slow as you want to get your friends and family. They're like, hey, have you done it? Can you send it in? So yeah, you have to have references. Then once those come in at random, they'll call them and confirm everything was as they said on there. And, we didn't fill it out ourselves and send it in.
Was there any part of the home study process that surprised you that you didn't expect? That's something that maybe state really cared about that you didn't think they would care about?
If I'm honest, I was surprised at how easy it was. That one of the things that the case worker said, he said, we're looking for every reason to approve you, not to disapprove of you. Like, it's not like we're trying to find every reason why you're a horrible person. That's not what they're there for. We know, and that's what I felt it was going to be. Is like, oh, you have chemicals under your sink. Psh, you're not getting it. So like, that's kind of how I felt it was going to be. And it wasn't like that at all. And he was very like, oh, and asking more questions than us that we can talk about, saying how qualified we are, in his eyes. And so that was really, really awesome. He's like, wow, I love that you guys do this. And are you active in church? We're like, yes. And that's so cool, blah, blah, blah. So he made us feel more comfortable. But I think what I was more surprised about is, you guys are fine. Oh, you don't have, I think the main thing is pool and guns. Do you have any of those? No? Okay, your house is great. But like, they're looking for reasons to approve you because, for most adoptions, I won't say for newborn, for most adoptions, there is a lack of families. For newborn adoptions, there are about 30 families waiting for every child available. So that's a little, unfortunate, but for older kids, there are many families who they want to approve. And I know that there's like a safety net, also feeling like we had our fingerprints done, our criminal backgrounds, child abuse registries, everything was from, Arizona, from Washington when I lived here before. They do such detailed work that I think once we're in the house, it's almost like, hey, you're not crazy, right? Okay, cool. I mean, they still do their due diligence, but I wouldn't say that it's as scary as I thought it was.
And this whole paperwork process, this agency helps you through it, or do you hire like an attorney, or do you just fill it out everything yourself, or do you have somebody walk you through it to help you answer those questions better, more accurately?
So the consulting agency really, really helped us. So they gave us a list of home study agencies that we can choose from in our state, and we're like, okay, we'll go with this one. But really, the paperwork is you kind of do it on your own. And in some states, in Florida, there's a lot of adoption attorneys that facilitate the whole thing, but you still have to go through a home study, which doesn't require lawyers or anything like that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Go to your doctor, get a physical. Pull out your statements from your bank. So stuff like that is pretty simple. Where you'll need a lawyer at the very end, which is the part we haven't gone through. And we'll face it in about like 4 to 6 months. That is when you'll need to hire an attorney to finalize the adoption.
And the agency, is it like a non-profit that they volunteer their services, or for the agency, what was the cost from you guys for a family that wants to adopt to pay agency? What does the process from beginning to the end? What did it cost you guys financially to go from first application to having Naomi in your family? What did that cost you in total costs?
It's a little crazy. And agencies you can really choose one with, you can find one with lower costs. But total all in, we're nearing $65,000-$70,000 for all in cost.
And what are the biggest costs of the process where the money goes?
The biggest one would be the agency cost. So first you have your home study cost, which can range from $1,500 to $3,000, depending on what state you're in. You have your filing for fingerprints. You have so one thing you don't have to do, which we did do, was get a consultant, and that's around $7,000. And then the biggest part is the agency fee, which is the actual agency that you have your child placed with. And the reason those are so big, some people are like, this is ridiculous. They're telling me. And I was like, if I make a fuss about it, it's not going to change the whole industry. Do I think it's a little crazy? Yes. But in there goes lawyers, their office fees. So they get paid to make sure everything is good. They work on Sundays, Saturdays, all the time. And marketing costs, you pay for birth mom living situation from the moment you get matched and for a few weeks after she gives birth. There's so many different fees, and total of that would probably be $50,000. And then we apply to multiple agencies. That's another thing. With every agency, there is a fee as well for application. And the reason we did that is because it reduces your wait time significantly. If you apply with one agency, you can be waiting after you're approved for almost 2 years. From the time we submitted everything to the time we had Naomi was like a year and 3 months, which is insane. It was so quick. And so at the end, we're almost done paying things, but we'll have to hire a lawyer to finalize everything and present it to the court once we have a court date, and say, hey, after Naomi was placed with them, the agency did this many visits and has recommended that everything goes through, and here's all the paperwork. And so you pay the attorney one final time.
And we'll come back to the finances a little bit later, but on the process, so you do your home study, they ask all the questions, they interview the references, the relatives, the family, inspect the home, and state approves you as you're able to be adoptive parents. And what's the next step after that?
You apply to agencies if you haven't already. The consulting agency, part of our package was, hey, fill out this fat stack of papers, and we'll basically try to transfer all of that information to multiple applications within the agencies that we work with, which was a godsend. After filling out so much paperwork, I was like, yes, please. And so we registered.
And that's the same agency that you guys hired for your initial home study process?
No, that's the one that gave us the list of different home study agencies. So there's a consulting one, there's a home study one, and then there's the adoptive one.
Okay, so you go to total different people and say, hey, here, I'm approved, I'm licensed to adopt, and you find different agencies to find you a child.
Exactly. So you apply with, and they have cases that come through. So, for example, a local hospital here, St. Francis, right, or whatever it's called, might have a contract with an agency or three and say, hey, a baby just came in, mom has signed away her rights, can you help us out? And so that is kind of how they work with those people. Or sometimes a person might come in directly to the agency that they heard about. Hey, this is an adoption agency. I want to make a plan for an adoption. Can you guys help me out? I'm due this date. So that's kind of how it works. But so after we were approved in the beginning of March, we quickly filled out all the paperwork for the actual adoption agencies, and we saw our first case. It came over email. It just said baby. It was so crazy to me. I was driving home and I was like, it says baby. It was in April. So it took about a month after we were approved to fill everything out again for agencies. And then we got the baby. And I remember freaking out. It was insane. I called Josh. I was like, we just got our first case. But that's the next step in the process is you receive cases. This is specific to newborn domestic adoption. So there's a few different ones. But you receive a case. And on there it says maybe first name of birth mom. Maybe some identification of her height, her weight, or anything like that. Whether birth father is in the picture, whether they know who he is, and then just an intake form that she filled out. That's all you get. You don't get much. Sometimes you get, hey, baby's due this day, baby's gender is this, and then most of the time in the intake form you will see whether there's any drug exposure. And this is one of the craziest things that we learned. 95, if not 99% of cases you will see have some sort of drug exposure. Like, it is very rare. It's like a unicorn to not have any drug exposure. And so I think when people are walking into adoption, they think, oh, this healthy child that whatever, don't even think about drugs. No, you have to. And when you are filling out your applications, you have on there is listed every possible drug that you can think of. And as a future adoptive parent, you Google, you research what are their effects on them from 2 years old, 3 and on. What is the developmental effects, physical effects. You look at everything and say, yes, no, or I would consider.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to go through this whole list. And that was one of the craziest parts, I think, is it's also very defeating and sad to think my baby might be withdrawing from all of that. And you don't know how high the risk or the exposure is or how low it is. But that is one thing I think if people hear anything is that don't be surprised that that's 99% of the cases that you receive. And so you kind of see that, you look at it and see, okay, is this something that I'm willing to take on? And then if you say yes, that is something I'm willing to take on, and I'm willing to, not even willing, but able to, right? You have to be honest with yourself. We had a case where, there was a baby with certain things that happened, and now I'm like, okay, you have to think about it realistically. This child will require for me to quit my job. Can I do that right now? I can't do that right now. And so you can't be like, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm a this, I'm that. No, you have to be realistic and make sure that the child that needs that care can get that care from a family that is ready for that. I was not ready for that for, my very first child. And so if you are ready, you say, I want to present my profile to this birth mom. And they present your profile, and she gets to see, I don't know, upwards of 10 of them, maybe 5. And she looks through them. And in this profile, you have pictures of you, about your family. It's nothing like location descriptive or anything like that, but it's just about your whole life and what you're writing to the birth mom. And so our profile book was like 10 to 15 pages. And they look at that and they say, hey, I feel confident with this family, or I want to match with this family. And then they call you back and say, okay, you guys are matched. Or they'll say, hey, birth mom decided to go with a different family. Mm-hmm. And so when when it's not you, you just get a no and you wait for the next case to come up. So that's kind of...
At any point of the process, do you get to meet the mom?
Yes, if she wants to. So it's really up to what she wants. And if she wants to meet you beforehand, that's great. I've heard of people that have met prior to giving birth and who have also wanted the adoptive mom to be there for the birth, mm-hmm. which was like, wow, that's amazing, because they felt such a strong connection. And it really depends on how open they are.
So the birth mom is the one that decides of open, closed, mm-hmm. I guess how open she wants to be, or connected to adoptive parents.
Yeah. Well, in the very beginning, you also decide. Right. So when you're filling out like, hey, I'm comfortable with this drug exposure, I'm comfortable with these physical abnormalities or disabilities, you also decide how open are you open to an open adoption? Do you want it completely closed? Do you want it semi-open, or do you want it open? And so they won't even show you cases where birth moms have elected, hey, I want it completely open, if your initial application said closed only. And nowadays, it is very rare to have a closed adoption. So many studies have shown that for children growing up in closed adoptions, oftentimes there is this piece of, like, they feel like something's missing. They feel like they don't fully fit in. And if they don't have something to kind of point back to of their origin, it's hard for them on their mental health. And for children who always grew up knowing they're adopted, who have had some kind of connection, whether that is to their biological siblings or to their biological parents, have grown up without the feeling or the need that like something's different about them, something's wrong with them, or it's just so much better for their mental health. So at first, Josh and I, did feel a little, uncomfortable, like, what do you mean? Like, how open is, and the insecurities. That's really what it is insecurities started coming in of like, well, what if she wants that person to, biological mom to be her mom and not me, and and you start to think about it. But one of the biggest things you learn about in this process is you die to yourself. Mm-hmm. You die to your own insecurities. You die to your own desires in most cases, because it's not about what you want. It's, hey, what does the birth mom want? Hey, what does the agency want? Hey, what does that look like? And you're just kind of like, you're along for the ride. But it's also like a humbling experience. So for us, we said we wanted as open as possible, and that would include, either annual visits in a curated setting, right? So they wouldn't necessarily be coming over to our house. It would be mostly, hey, let's meet at the agency or at a local park or something. Pictures, notes or something like that. We were very open to it. We not only wanted to have a relationship with our child, we wanted to also have a relationship with the birth mom, because it's like they call it adoption triad. It's the birth parents, adoptive parents, and the child. And every party in the triad, there's hurt, there's pain, there's excitement, there's stuff going on, and it's this little triangle that not a lot of people will ever understand, all the dynamics. And so having those people in your life that understand that and know exactly kind of what your life looks like is really helpful to ground somebody, and, just so much better for their mental health. But yeah, we were very open. We started off with I don't know how I feel about this, but our consultant Fallon, super amazing human. She walked us through this, and she's like, guys, God is, just loves a big open family, and everybody's included. And if you are able to do that, it's going to be so great for your baby. And if you're not, and you really aren't comfortable, that's also okay. She didn't make us feel like absolute horrible human beings. She just said, hey, from the last 20 years of studies that have come out, and we've watched these kids, it's so much better if they do have that sense of openness and ability to say, hey, yeah, I knew who my birth parent was, and they loved me, and they, all these other things, and they don't feel the need of, oh, there's something wrong with me, there's something different about me. No, adoption celebrated in our family. It's always going to be talked about, and if, their birth parents want to be a part of their life, we want that as well, so that they feel like, hey, I got two sets of parents who love me.
So in your situation specifically, what did mom choose as far as openness, how open or how closed the adoption process is?
Yeah, so for that, we chose open. For her, we're kind of keeping that just as for her. So we're not really sharing with details about what her parents chose, her birth parents chose. That's one of those things we thought about, okay, what aspects of her story are going to be sacred just for her, and so that's just one of them.
Of course, it's respectable. You mentioned the significant costs of the whole process. Are there public government resources, funds available to help with the cost, or is that fully on your own of fundraising and paying for yourself?
Yeah, so there are grants. They're not government grants, but you have to have a certain income to qualify. And then the only government, I'd say, incentive or help that there is in order to adopt is, I believe, a $14,000 a year tax deduction. So if you spend any money on adoption this year, and you can deduct up to $14,000 of it, and then say you still haven't matched, and next year you spend more money on it, every single year, for adoption qualified spending, you can get up to $14,000. But otherwise, government grants, I did not come across any. There are companies or organizations who are 501c3s, and you can create a profile with them. And what's really cool is that when people donate, they can donate that, charitable giving that they can do up to every year, and it's tax deductible. The caveat with those is that you are very restricted on what you can spend that money on. So it can only go towards adoption costs or agency costs sometimes. And so maybe our consulting fee wouldn't have been covered. So we didn't go that route. But for us, where it was really, really cool, we raised $35,000. So out of the more than half, I think, for what we needed, just through our community of people coming together and people who don't even know us. Just literally, I would receive a Zelle and it's $1,000. I'm like, what the heck?
That's so awesome.
This is insane. Yeah. So it was really awesome. And then not only that, God came through big time. The day that we got matched with Naomi's birth mom, we were in a lawsuit for a year and a half for a business thing. And that very same day, I finally received a settlement check. It literally was on my desk at work. And an hour later, I got the call, hey, you're matched. So I was like, not only, God provide up to then, he's like, I got you over
That's so
time, just
cool.
even more than that. Yeah, so I was like, you got this.
That's so cool. As you're going through the whole process of getting matched with a child, what are some common reasons? You mentioned drugs. Is that one of the main reasons why a mom would give up a child for somebody else to parent her? And are there reasons why they don't choose abortion as often it's chosen and rather to give it up for adoption? So I guess first, what's the main reason or most common reason that usually moms choose to give up the kid for adoption?
Yeah. I don't like to be language police, but that's the first thing that you learn is you don't talk about give up, right?
Okay.
It's more make a plan for adoption, because this person literally walked in and said, I'm going to make a plan because I want something better for my child, and I can offer them right now. So yeah, that's been a little funny, but I said the same thing the very first call. And so the biggest reason is their inability to provide the life that they want for their child. So whether they're too young, they got pregnant in high school, or even middle school, with their boyfriend, and that was not something that they planned for, and know that as a teenager they can't provide them the life. They can be homeless. They could be, drug addicts. Sometimes that happens too. But it's really, honestly, any circumstance. There could be that they had an affair outside of marriage, and that's not something that they're comfortable with. But one of the biggest things is what we celebrate is the fact that they did choose to even go through the grueling 9 months of pregnancy, and they get to see their baby maybe for 2-3 hours, and that's it. But main reason is just they can't provide them the life that they want to provide them. And that's one of the things I was talking with my mom about, and she's like, I just can't imagine, placing one of you for adoption. I just can't imagine the pain. And I said, yeah, that's how much her love is for her baby, is that she's willing to go through the pain of, giving her to somebody else because she loves her that much. She's willing to pain herself so that she could provide a better life for her child. And I can't imagine, more sacrificial love than that, than to say, it's not about me. I know that they deserve better, and I'm gonna die to myself again, and hope they have a better life. But yeah.
At what point can mom change the birth mom? At what point can she change her mind?
Yeah.
After going through the process, can she change her mind and decide that she wants to parent the kid?
Yeah. So once we're matched, she can decide at any point, until she gives birth, hey, this is not what I want to do. And she, in the state of Arizona, she can decide for 72 hours after she gives birth. And so that's when consent to revoke rights is signed. In Arizona, it's 72 hours. I believe in Florida, it's 48 hours. In Utah, it's 24 hours. And the only reason I know those states is because we were registered with all three of them. I'm not sure what it is in the state of Washington, but in those are what was described to me as the hardest 3 days of your life, because although you don't have rights to the child, you get to take them home with you once they're discharged, and that could be before the 3 days, the 72 hours are up, which is what happened with us. We took her home on Saturday, 72 hours was up on Sunday. And so we saw her Friday, met her Friday, we took her home Saturday, and then Sunday, 11:49 a.m. is when the consents were supposed to be signed. And it's like 12 o'clock, 12:10, 12:20. And I was not worried until that moment, and 12:30. And they told me hey, I'll text you right away once consents are signed. You guys are good to go. And I'm not getting anything. So I was like, oh, Lord, I'm just going to text her. So I texted her, and she calls me. She's like, I'm literally walking out of the room now. They signed. You're all good. I was oh. So after that, zero chance, unless they were it comes into question whether it was done willingly. But the agency is so awesome about this. They have their caseworker. We have our caseworker. They never intermingle, in the sense of my caseworker is not there when they're signing. Only theirs is, to make sure that really they know what, this is the choice that they want to make. Nobody's making them do this. After that, there is no going back. like zero. And that is another thing that I got a lot of afterwards is, but what if they know where you guys live and they want to take her back? And I was they know exactly what they're doing. They're very kind people, and that would be considered kidnapping. And I don't think that anybody, like, you don't hear about that. You know, that's just, we would have been trained for it if that's something, or warned if that happens all the time. But yeah, 72 hours in the state of Arizona, it wasn't the hardest until that last 30 minutes when I wasn't hearing
You're just
anything.
not sure.
Yeah, I was like, because with her, Thursday she was born, and we got a text on Wednesday that we weren't wanted at the hospital. And the panic and the fear started to set in, because the plan was always to come there right when she gives birth. She'll have time with her, but once she goes into recovery, we'll be able to go to the nursery and spend time with her. And we get a text or a call, and I was looking at Josh, and I'm talking to the caseworker on the phone, and he's like, your tone just completely changed the second half of the call. And I was like, they don't want us there. Like, and I was like, they're afraid she's changing her mind. And if she changes her mind, this is what's a little crazy. If she changes her mind after she gives birth, or even before that, and you're matched, you lose upwards of $18,000. You don't get it back. It's just called a failed adoption, and you don't get it back, and you try again. And in the state, in the U.S., the failed adoption rate is around 40%, which is so high.
Is the failure because when after the birth, mom delivers the baby, she changes her mind? Is that the most common reason?
Yep. Yeah. That she saw the baby, it's too hard. She thinks she can parent, and so she decides to parent, and so that's just what happens. And so our consultant, we called her and told her what's happening, and she's like, I'm not gonna lie, I am a little worried, but we're gonna trust God that it's gonna come through. And so having two people tell me who have done this for a long time that they're worried, I was like, oh no. It's just the hardest thing to unfall in love with someone you've never met. Like, we've already thought about her for 2 months. We hadn't given her a name yet, but like, we thought about her. We found out her gender about 2 weeks before she was born. We started buying clothes. Before that, it was just a room with furniture in there. But now it's like, our baby girl is coming. There's gonna be somebody in the crib. And then if like that whole weekend, I texted my family and I was like, please don't ask us questions. We know nothing. And I'm like, I was just not having it. And we got a text like, hey, come to the hospital Friday morning. And so we did. And what was really cool is, like, before that, they weren't really open to meeting us. I think it was a little hard for them. But they met us that Friday morning, and we got to spend like hours with them, with the birth parents. And it was such a God-given moment to really like, okay, like, this is how you are, and this is how you are. And one of the biggest things that Josh and I found is right off the bat is like how kind they are. And like, it was absolutely amazing to know that, hey, these are the parents, these are her birth parents. And I'm really excited that one day I'll get to tell her about the 2.5 hours we spent with them. But yeah.
That's cool to have that moment with birth parents. So after 72 hours, legally, you're the parent of the child. How involved is the state still after 72 hours? Is the state still involved, or are you fully, legally, 100% the parent, or is the state still pretty involved?
Yeah, we are not her parents right now, which is crazy, legally. We only have power of attorney over her medical needs, her travel, anything like that. But the agency is actually her guardian. And that's there in order to, afterwards, within 30 days, you'll get your first visit from the agency. They'll interview you. They'll see what's going on with the baby. And they'll come every single month. If everything is well, within 4 months or so, they will recommend that the adoption is finalized, and you get your lawyer, and then you get your court date. At your court date, that is when the judge says, asks you questions. She gets her new name, which is the one we gave her, legally, because right now, legally, it's a different name. And once she gets that, we get our social security card and new birth certificate, actually with us as birth parents on there, which is something that I never thought was a thing But you get a whole new birth certificate, and that is when we are legally her parents. And the state is no longer involved after that. But until then, they just want to make sure, we didn't go crazy and we're not some weird people, which I
Makes
totally
sense.
get. Yeah.
Makes sense for follow-up for after. You mentioned that you're looking forward to sharing with Naomi the moment you had with her birth parents. At what age do you think you guys are planning to, or you think it's appropriate to share with a child?
Yeah.
You guys are her adoptive parents, and she has different birth parents.
Yeah. We talked about that from the very beginning. We'll start introducing the concept at an age appropriate. Whatever the age appropriate thing is at that time. And so there's books on that. There's books for little kids. And one of the things, we want to buy for her nursery is books that illustrate stories of adoption. So she can start thinking about it. But we have friends who adopted 3 children through foster care. And they know that they're adopted. They know that they had a tummy mommy. For them, that's the kind of language that you want to use from the very beginning. And that, hey, tummy mommy, that she wanted to have a better life for you, so she chose your mommy and daddy to take care of you. And so you go through every age and stage and kind of explain it to them in new ways and open up for conversation. And I think with Naomi it'll be a little bit easier, just because she is Caucasian on both ends. But when you have a biracial child that is or a different race than you that is in your family, it's a little bit more, hey, you can see that you are adopted way earlier on. And the biggest thing is people making conversation about it or asking questions outside of the home when your child is present. So they can ask you, but your child is listening. And so if you have not already prepared them, if you don't have a plan for that, it's a little bit hard because they're soaking everything in and they're like, oh, are you their parents? Are you his or her parents? Or what does that adoption look like? And so if you don't get ahead in front of it, I want them to hear it. I want her to hear it from us, and I don't want it to be something that's so crazy or it's something to be held secret or ashamed about. Because usually when we keep things in secret or in private, it's almost feels a little bit shameful.
Yeah.
There's nothing shameful about
Something's wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's looked down upon. Like, why can't we talk about it? Is this something's wrong with it that we can't even talk about it?
Exactly. So we're all the time we agreed from the very beginning she's going to know it, and she's going to know that she's chosen and she's loved, regardless. And that the one thing I would say is the misconception is oh, well, I'll just treat her like my other biological kids. You can't. She is different. You just have to admit it. She's different. She will always have this sense of, I am adopted and you are biological or whatever, if you have a blended family, biological and adopted kids. And that's one thing that we committed to is we're not going to say, oh, I'm just going to treat you like every other kid. You have needs. You might have, especially with, drug exposure and all these other things, you might have other physical needs or health needs. You will have mental health, needs, and hey, we want to look into what does it look like for us to even be in therapy as a family and make sure that we're at all times we have the support and the resources we need in order to support her as best as we can. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Hey, she might look like us, and so that doesn't mean that we can treat her just as like anybody else. It's you didn't sign on for this whole journey to you just can't. You have to be committed to the adoption world, and constantly learn about it. One of my best examples that I learned is my friend Anika. She has a lot of kids, and I'm amazed at that woman, what she does every day. But she had one of her, I think it was third or fourth child, and she was a little bit, she cried a little bit more. She had a little bit more of an attitude, and I babysat them sometimes. And I told her, I was like, Anika, how do you do it? And she's like, Lily, God gave me this child, and it's my responsibility to learn everything about her and get resourced so I can bring her up the best way that her character, in the most positive way, in the most positive light, not just say, oh, you're my difficult child. You can't do that. Every child is different, and I need to learn about each of them, whether that's from a book, whether that's from a class. As their mother and as their parents, that is my responsibility before God to grow them and to become the humans that He created them to be. And so that's how I think about Naomi. And our other children, it's like, okay, they came to us via adoption. And it is my responsibility that God has given me to learn everything I can about the way of, that she came into our life, and resource her and equip her to have the best life that God has for her. And I take that really, really seriously, that it's not just about us building a family. Like, oh, yeah, year 3, we wanted to start a family. For 3 years, I have been thinking about what kind of human we want to raise. God, like, is this part of your plan? Is, do they come now or do they come later? What do you have? This is not just we want to be cute little Instagram family, you know? This is a human life, and they have a purpose and the mission and the vision set before them that I have been just entrusted to carry. Yeah. And so, yeah.
And the whole idea of sharing and raising the kid, the child, with adoption being a normal thing, part of life, and it's like you either navigate that early while the child is young, it's normalized in the child's young years, or we hear, you can say, horror stories of the kid being a teenager, older, and finding out that he or she is adopted, because then I feel like you question the whole kind of your whole life of like, I've been lied to. Nobody was honest enough with me. Like, what else do I not know about my life? Now they start questioning everything because they feel like their whole foundation now is shaken because nobody was honest with them about where they came from, who they are. So it makes sense for like the argument that you normalize that from young age and they accept it as a normal part of life.
One of the stories I heard from adoptive family is like their kids started going to school, and she came home and she's like, Mom, did you know some people don't have adopted kids in their family? That's so weird. It's such a normal thing for her that people who didn't have that, it was like, you're weird. What is wrong with you? Why don't you have, an adoptive sister or a brother? So
I know you guys saw you just received Naomi, and you guys are excited and celebrating for your future plans. Are you guys planning to adopt anymore? Is it like, hey, we have Naomi and we're happy and we didn't think about it that far yet? Or is that in the plans as well for the future?
With how tired we are right now? We want to always keep our profile active. So all the paperwork up to date, and then just like definitely we're not looking to in this next year. But we always want to put ourselves in the position where if God asks, we can say yes. We're in a position to say yes. So on our part, what that looks like is making sure our home study's not expired. So in Arizona, they expire every 18 months. In like Florida and other states, it's every year. So you have to make sure that's up to date. So we want to make sure that that's done. Our fingerprints are always up to date. And so that if we're ever called upon, we can say yes. And with, not to get politicized or political, but with the new Roe v. Wade, laws and all these other things that are kind of being reversed and whatnot, you're going to start seeing more children whose parents are making plans for adoption, which is like awesome. They're going through that process and so we want to be part of a solution and part of just being able to say yes. And while we were at the hospital, it's crazy because we thought it wasn't that often that, somebody comes to a hospital and gives birth and checks themselves out. But the 2 days that we spent there, we saw 4 babies who were born and whose moms, just checked themselves out of the hospital and rescinded their rights right then and there. And I was just so shocked. I was like, wait, how often does this happen? And the nurse said, like, oh, all the time, especially even more now. And so it also depends what state you're in, but that's kind of like, okay, this is our reality. And we were called, Fallon, our consultant, said this for Lily and Josh, like we were called to widows and orphans, not specific widows and orphans. So you say yes, and then you allow God to close the doors on which ones are not yours, because we were like, oh, do I feel a connection from this case? God, is this the one? And she's like, it's more faith-filled to step out and say yes, and then allow God to close that door if it's not meant for you. And so that's how we started treating everything. But this year, probably not. This is so cruel. We have had so many people give us advice, and some of it I'm just like, I didn't ask for this. But nobody has talked about cluster feeding. And that is where she is right now. She wakes up every 45 minutes. She's like, I want to eat. So how tired we are, I don't know.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Every minute of it is going to be worth it.
Yeah.
What are some advice or encouragement would you share, or maybe caution the parents that are considering, or families that are considering adoption, from your experience now? Looking back almost a year and a half back, how would you encourage them or warn them on starting the process?
Yeah, I think what helped us the most is, hey, you take one step at a time. So just take the first step, and call an agency, do the home study. So maybe you do the home study, and then you'll be ready to do the next thing. I kind of see this as how if I don't want to do something like work out ever, I don't ever want to work out. But if I tell myself, hey, just go do 5 push-ups, I end up doing 20, you know? And so that's how I see that first step. Just try the first step, and it might open up your heart to so much more. And so you don't have to go further than you want to go. And that's okay. If you did your home study, you're approved. You don't want to get on the agency list, that's okay. You don't have to until you're ready. But take the whatever first step if you feel just an inkling to pursue this. I would say be committed to the adoption world, of learning, constantly learning, and it just dying to yourself and your feelings. And I think that's the hardest part of one of the hardest parts is in this process, your feelings matter zero. If I'm honest, it's a lot about what does the baby need and what does the birth mom need. And I totally understand that 100%. And some days it'll be hard for that to happen, because oftentimes you also come from a place of infertility, right? And there's a lot of pain. But then when you step into this world, it's nobody cares about that, because that's done and gone. And then you have to focus on the child. And so knowing that is constant humility and, okay, God, we're on this path and I know this is for us. And so this is a snag in the process. We're going to keep moving forward. Take that first step, and don't be afraid of it. If this is what you feel called to, do it. I would caution around, saying I want white baby with blonde hair and blue eyes, right? That's not something that you'll be waiting 5 years. And also some agencies are very not open to that kind of thing. But at the same time, if you know that you cannot take care of a child with Down syndrome, put that down. It's not a bad thing. Or if you know you don't have the community to have a child that is African American in your family, say you're not open to that, because you will require more learning, more education. That is one of the biggest learning aspects in education. You have to go through so many classes and read books, is about a multiracial adoption. And if your child will go through a whole different, life if they don't really look like you, or into the community that you're a part of. So if your child is of a different ethnicity or color than you, are there people in their life or in your community that are going to look like them, or are you just in the suburbs of, Arizona, and they will never find something that they can relate with? So those are the biggest things of, yes, be honest with yourself about what you can and cannot do. You never want to get in over your head, because you were just trying to be a kind human being and say, yes, I can take care of. If you can't, you can't. And that's okay. But at the same time, be open to what God has for you. And it's not just about you starting a family. This is somebody else's life too. That is going to be changed radically.
You guys decided to go with a newborn adoption. But there are different types of adoptions. Some people choose a newborn. Some people choose to adopt an older kid. Or even before that, with foster care. Because in foster care and adoption, what are the main differences between those?
Yeah. So with foster care, a lot of people have the misconception is, hey, I'm just going to foster to adopt. And if I'm honest, foster to adopt adoptions are almost free. If not, even they might also pay you.
Almost free to have a foster child in your house, yeah?
Yeah. So you will also get, if you foster, you get a credit even for their child care. You get a stipend, all these other things. And that's why there's also so many horrible stories with foster care, because some people are in there only for the money. But if your child does become eligible, the adoption for that child is almost free as well. And so that's why some people go the route of fostering. However, fostering the main purpose of it is reunification. It's not adoption. And
reunification with their biological parents.
Mm-hmm. So they're in your home while their biological parents are getting, either getting clean, getting a job, getting fit to be a parent. And the best thing for that child is to be with their biological parent. And you're there as a conduit for, 3 months, 6 months, however long, until that happens while, they're working with the parent. And you're providing a safe, loving space for the child to grow up in.
Temporarily.
That's the key word there. And sometimes, people also don't walk into it because they're like, well, I might get attached, and then, I don't want to, let them go. But that's, again, if you have the expectation and knowledge and with what you're walking into, it's going to be much easier. But although the adoption cost is so drastic for a regular adoption route versus fostering, it does come with its nuances where it's not meant just for adoption. The main purpose is reunification.
Okay, so the costs are even low. Let's say if you foster a child and let's say a year, 2 years goes by and the parents are not fit to parent the child, and you decide to adopt the child and the state allows you, are the costs really low at that point as well?
Yep, like $2,000 if that. Like very, very low.
But the huge risk that you are taking is that you take the child as your own, you're raising it, you're parenting it, but 6 months or a year later, the biological parents can come and decide to be reunited with their children.
If the caseworkers deem that they're fit, they follow their program, everything else, then yes. And that's what they're hoping for. That's why foster care exists. But at the same time, sometimes it doesn't work out and the rights are severed, and then that child that you're fostering becomes eligible for adoption. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always happen. But I think if somebody's walking into foster care, I would say walk into foster care to foster, not just to adopt. And I think that's one thing that maybe one day in the future we'll do. Right now, it's just kind of not. I don't want to, do that process while I'm still working. While I'm, we're both out of the house. But once things are a little bit more stable and we understand this is the notion that we're bringing this child in with, that they're not ours. Mm-hmm. We're here to be just the hands and feet of Jesus, to love on them while they're in our care. And then knowing full well that if their parents, everything goes well, we're going to celebrate them being reunified.
Got it. Is the process similar to adopt a little older child rather than a newborn, or is still the process exactly the same? You go through the state, you get chosen, and you adopt, or is the process different if the child, let's say, 4 or 5 years old?
Very, very similar. I would say the biggest difference would be you're now not presenting to birth moms. You say, hey, I'm open to children of, this range of age. And then they look through foster care homes and say, okay, there is a child who's eligible for adoption. However, their foster family does not want to adopt because they're only fostering. And so that child is eligible for adoption. And there are so many children currently in foster care from 1 to 18 who are eligible, but I understand people why they choose a newborn. Mm-hmm. We also thought, hey, maybe when we're going to have biological kids, and then later on we're going to have a little bit more of parenting under our belts, so we'll be open to an older child. But since this is our first child, we definitely wanted to kind of when the child is born, a mother and the father are born as well, and grow with Naomi and learn and stuff. And maybe later on in life, we'll be more open to a kid who's older. But there's also an age limit. So I think we started the process when I was 22 or 23. And I believe that the oldest kid because I'm, the younger one in the relationship that we could adopt, would be 11 or 12 years old, because you cannot be less than 10 years older than your child. So I totally understand. So there was a little bit of limitation there, but at the same time, again, we were looking for a newborn and domestically. So it's a newborn domestic adoption.
How different is international adoption?
So one of the biggest things is when you're going through your home study, the home study that we got is domestic, and so you would need to get like a certification for international, and it's like a little bit more extensive, more paperwork, more education, and stuff like that. And then you match with an agency out, wherever country that you want to adopt from. It is harder. I will say we did not dive into deep into that realm, but we have friends who have done that, and they adopted their baby girl, and they got to take their baby girl home when she was 2. And so like they had
the process took so long.
Yep. So that's kind of like the downside. It could take as fast or as long as really the government works and what they want. We also looked into adopting from Ukraine with everything that's going on there, and just, things are happening. And so our hearts were really, really open to that. However, when this country's in a state of war, all adoption cease. And even adoptions that were finalized, if their child was still in Ukraine, they couldn't pick them up.
Oh, wow.
That's when once borders were shut, it was done. So when the war is over in Ukraine, the search begins for biological parents. If they cannot find biological parents or relatives, that is when those children will become eligible for adoption. But until then, no matter how much you want to, no matter how much you're like, hey, I have a home, and you know that child doesn't have parents or relatives, you can't do it.
Yeah, it makes sense. The international will be more difficult because now you're dependent on the United States adoption laws, but also you have to satisfy the country that you're receiving the child from, and you have to satisfy all their demands and the laws that they have, and every country could have their own
exactly. And it's more expensive too, because you have to. Well, fees are expensive, but you also have to travel there 2-3 times, and so you're calculating airfare and all these other things and stay there. But yeah, it's a little bit more extensive, and I would say probably in our future, but just wasn't for our first. Yeah.
You mentioned community a couple times, from the child growing up in a community that you're part of, but also how open community around you was helpful financially. What can a local church can do to be a resource to a family that's considering adoption?
Yeah. One of the biggest things I think is forming there's a connect group for young marrieds, young families, young whatever. Honestly, formulating a connect group for families who've adopted. They can relate on so much and give each other so much, education and somebody to turn to. We had one of the restaurants that we go to all the time. It's called Liberty Market, and one of the owners there, they adopted their baby girl, and it was just so cool to have people in places of in the community that we're a part of, even the bigger community that you can come to, and just ask them questions. So we went there on the last day before we got to meet her, and I was kind of feeling down and out because there's talk about her changing her mind. And I saw the owner, and she's like, "Oh, are you guys gonna meet?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so she was able to just speak into that and have an encouraging word. And she's like, "I know it's so hard, but once you're on the other side of it, it'll make sense." And so leaving with that word, really just propelled us into the weekend for those 72 hours. But she is also for one of the church that she's a part of. She heads up the adoption and foster care initiatives. And she's like, "Hey, yep, at our church we have resources. We might not be finances, but education, support groups. If you have an adopted child and you just brought them home, meal trains. We'll have our community come around you and support you. And so things like that. I think it'd be really amazing if there are grants from the church, or how we always give to missions and outside things hey, can we have something allocated to families who want to adopt and maybe financially they can't? or they need a little bit of help. And a part of the church, if they're committed to that, can go towards families that are there. Of course, you know, you go through all the process of filling everything out, but you're literally helping your community. And I think that would be absolutely amazing. But we have an awesome community. And one of the first things that we got her home, and somebody came, our friend Mel, she came and took our dog Oliver for a walk, you know, and it was just like, okay, that's a little bit of, you know, out of sight, out of mind. Sana, she started a meal train. So for a week and a half, we didn't cook once. People just came and brought food, which was so helpful. And sometimes people do that for usually when people give birth, right? And so they're like, well, you didn't give birth. You don't need the same help. And it's like,
you have a newborn in the
house.
I
have a newborn, yes. I don't sleep. And so I think just treating it also like how you treat your friends who just gave birth. Like, of course, I don't have to go through a healing process, but I am learning this new human. We are learning this new human together. And we might not be able to, one of us won't be able to stop working. And like, we just want to tend to her needs. And so that was really awesome, is when people walked in through the door of our community, they didn't go straight, let me see the baby. They said, what needs to be done? So I went straight to the dishwasher and started cleaning. And I was like, do you not want to see her? She's like, I want to see her, but I need to do this first. And that is what is helpful of just practically supporting people who are adopting.
Lily, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. Myself, I think many others are a lot more informed, encouraged of the whole process of how it happens. And I hope somebody that's on the fence has been thinking about it, that they're encouraged even more by your words, by your story. And some kid's life can be eternally changed because of your story, because the first steps that you take, and hopefully that encourages for somebody to take that first step and call their agency. Where can people find you to continue following your story as you guys Naomi keeps growing up? Maybe in the future, more adoptions. Where can people find you and hear your story and follow your story?
For sure. I'm mostly on Instagram, so Petit_Lil. And I post on there. I might take a little bit of hiatus to just take in the moments with her. But I'm very open, raw, and, you know, some things, of course, are kept sacred and just for us. But I believe that God gave us this amazing life to share that if you say yes to him, it might be a roller coaster, but it's always the best kind. So that's what you might be able to read on there, and you might be able to see future news about adoption. Who knows?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily.
Of course.